Shanna, thank you so much for joining SheLeads today. I am so excited to have you on the show, so just thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, Shanna, you are the founder and CEO of Modsy, an online interior home design service. And just from my perspective, it really gets away the pain points of decorating your home, designing a new home, because you allow these people to reimagine a home with new furniture, new designs, using 3D imagery and AR. But before Modsy, you were a partner at Google Ventures, so you've been a venture capitalist on the other side. And even before that, you founded your own company in the gaming industry, which later got acquired by Autodesk. So, Shauna's so excited to have you on the show and just learn from you. So just to get started, it seems like you have always had this entrepreneurial itch and just wanting to do something yourself and create something yourself. Is this true? And where did you discover entrepreneurship and that you could do this?
I'm not sure I actually had an entrepreneurial itch so much when I was at least in college and graduate school, but I did love creating. I loved creating new things.
Okay.
And I worked on a project when I was in graduate school. And it's a longer story how I found myself into entertainment technology as my graduate degree. But I worked on a project and I just couldn't imagine leaving school and putting it on a shelf and walking away from it, especially since it had had a bit of traction. And so before I knew it, an advisor was encouraging me to start a company, and I felt like that was the fastest way to get this thing into the real world. And many, many, many years later, I realized as I went down that path that it is there's nothing better than creating something and launching it into the world. And so for me, that was the definition of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So let's backtrack a little. I know you're very passionate about 3D technology, gaming. And where did that passion come from? Have you always been passionate about that? Because that's kind of where your first company was around.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it was actually, I loved math and science, and I loved art. I actually went to Carnegie Mellon because I loved painting, large scale oil paintings.
Okay.
But I liked math and science too. And so I was looking for this place where the two sort of sides of my brain would come together and where I could apply it in a way that was useful in the world. And I couldn't find really anything where I felt like they were actually equally balanced. One would either be math and science heavy and you sort of they wanted artists just to add a layer on top, right? Or very heavy art and math and science was kind of the subject matter or something, but it wasn't integrated in. And then I discovered graphics and I discovered that as an undergrad, specifically virtual reality. And it was for me, the game changer of my life. I was oh my God, this is where all these disciplines come together, people come together, and it's equally weighted. The storytelling and the art and the visuals are as important as the engineering that makes it all work. And if you don't have one or the other, you don't have a working product. And so for me, that was the unlock. And then I've been in that area ever since.
Wow. So out of curiosity, when you were studying VR, was it fairly new at that point? And also, was it just kind of around gaming? Because it has expanded to other things in terms of impact and the environment. So yeah, how was it at that stage?
Yeah, what's funny about virtual reality is that it's old and new.
Yeah.
It's been around actually for a really long time. When I was working on it, it was probably already decades old. The resolution is probably what has changed the most, and also how light the computer is that you're basically wearing over your face. But those are really the only two changes. So both the possibilities, this idea that you can be fully immersed into a 3D world, has been true since the very, very beginning of VR. Obviously the visual fidelity, making it feel more and more real, frame rates as well. But where and how you might apply it, I feel those ideas have been universal from day one. Everything from can you imagine this replacing the real world? Could we be immersed in this virtual reality and live our lives there, to the idea of social impact, the idea of using it for training, the idea of using it for just pure storytelling. Can you look around and see different parts of a story as it unfolds? And then honestly, most natural, because you're on rails, is games. And because you're so limited in your movement, which is still true today, it's just much more natural when there's something very specific for you to do. The time frame is capped and limited, and you're clear where you're supposed to look. And so a lot of what we did was games, but even in the early 2000s and even in the decade before that, everybody was exploring all of these ideas.
Yeah. That's so cool. It's really interesting to see kind of the transition to nowadays. Um, so you mentioned you had an advisor who kind of geared you on this path to entrepreneurship and almost informed you like, look, you can start your own thing and this is up to you in a way. So walk me through that process and what made you actually start your own thing and really get that push and have that desire to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it was both fast and slow.
Yeah.
I think I was not starting the company thinking, I'm going to start a company and be a like startup founder. Like that wasn't vocabulary I was using.
Yeah.
It was really for me about, I have this project I'm really passionate about. Early on, we were applying game technology basically to train emergency responders.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I wanted to like see it through, and I didn't know what that meant. So at the beginning, it was really about, can I get like enough money into a company to like produce this into the real world in a way that like real people could use it. And then before I knew it, it was clear that like investors and a startup path was the best way to do that, because we were inventing something that had never been created. A couple of years in and having met lots of other founders and investors and read books, I was like, oh, I have a startup. And like building a startup has like a whole set of like specifications and rules and things that you could follow and do well or not do well. And I'd unfortunately done a lot of those things not so well out of the box. But yeah, for me, even with Modsy, it's always been about kind of like birthing an idea from like your mind into like a visible creation in the world that some true end user is actually using.
Yeah. So you mentioned how it was almost a lot in the dark, like you were kind of just doing it and you didn't realize that there was actually these steps that could help you. Did you have regrets for starting this? Like, were there big challenges that you were like, why did I do this? And did you have people helping you along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think, I wonder if I had been in a program, like somewhere like Stanford or Berkeley, where, it's much more in the nature of students to be thinking about entrepreneurship, like if I would have potentially avoided some of the early pitfalls. But at the same time, I am definitely the kind of person who learns more by making the mistake myself firsthand and like hearing about it or reading it. And, as painful as it was, some of the early mistakes being like thinking advisors were co-founders and giving them equal equity, for example, like, you'd be advised against that, but you may not really understand why that's a bad thing to do. But I've now lived it and I understand why it's a bad thing to do. And I understand how painful it is to reverse decisions like that over time. So I don't know, some regrets, but not too many.
Yeah. And I think you raise a good lesson in the sense of just failure in general. And it's almost like you could have considered a failure, but at the same time, you're learning from it. And that could help you. I'm sure you brought a lot of the lessons and I'd love to learn more, but going to Modsy and kind of translating those lessons into now this is like a much better way. So I love
Absolutely.
that.
I mean, I think that's true in careers in general, right? Like I can use it for startups in particular, but even when I think about things I'm still learning today at Modsy that like, have been lessons that have been deeply ingrained with me, even within the last few months or few years, there'll be things I carry forward in my career forever.
Yeah. Great. It's so great. So now you founded your company. It was SimOps Studios, correct? Yeah.
Correct.
So, and then it got acquired by Autodesk. So what's that process like? Did they approach you when were you seeking someone? And how did you navigate, okay, this would be a great fit? Like they would take it over well.
Yeah. I mean, acquisitions are really interesting because they're kind of the perfect storm of timing. Like both sides have to be kind of like mentally ready and willing to make an investment. On the corporate side, it needs to be an important enough initiative to put manpower behind it and money behind it. And at a company, you need to be at a point where you're, for whatever reason, willing to actually be acquired and, sort of give up potentially the dream of like running your own business to join forces with somebody else. And then you have to kind of not like a little bit get lucky, but also kind of point yourselves in the direction from the beginning of a future that's important. And so we had the mix of all of those things. We were working on cloud-based technologies, which when I started the company, it wasn't even called cloud. It was basically like the idea that you would have a hosted solution and like, i.e. your servers were not on your premises. They were somewhere else. And you had kind of built tools and designed your entire program to work in such an environment. And for us, that was a big part of the future. Obviously, cloud is everything now, but at that point, it was not so obvious. But we took advantage of it very early in my last business, and specifically in 3D. So we were amongst a small number of companies with expertise in cloud, expertise in 3D, and had built all these tools and systems around those workflows. And meanwhile, here's a very large company that suddenly their entire business was being disrupted because they were no longer going to sell boxed, packaged, sort of like DVDs and CDs that you install, and working from your tools in this kind of like local location, right? It became all about subscription models and online and web-based services. And so as they migrated their entire company that way, it was the most important thing they were doing. They obviously had interest in acquisitions. So then we, meanwhile, had lived through the last recession. So my career has been very impacted by all these very strange moments.
Yeah.
The first one being 9/11 that led me down this path in the first place, our software for training. And then the recession, which was a big impact to my fundraising experience. So I went to fundraise. It was really hard. We did actually raise a Series A during the 2008, 2009 recession. But I went to think about the Series B, and I was like, that was hard. And Autodesk had been following us for like a year plus. And we've been talking to them. And as we reconnected with them about the same time as I was thinking a fundraise would happen, and they expressed interest in acquiring us, it was, again, like that perfect storm. And I decided, like, this is the moment I'm ready to like go join forces with a bigger company.
Yeah. So I have so many questions I could go. Before we get into going into Google Ventures, I do want to know, because you said how you've experienced funding in almost times of crisis. So what did you do to ensure you have this great mental well-being and just this calmness that almost you have to kind of put on for your employees and ensure that, okay, it's okay, like this is a hard time, but we'll get through it. Like, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I think it's the same way that I deal with it personally. Like, life is hard. Things never go perfectly as planned, and you just have to believe in your own internal strength at any given time. And then you need to commit to making it through. And, if you wake up every day and you're like, I'm going to do this, these things are hard, but I'm just going to take one more step forward, then you can make it out of almost any circumstance, both personally, and the same goes in business. And so the way I've treated any of these things and the way we're living through it right now as a company is communicate frequently, be super transparent, and then just remind everybody we're really strong. Like, we've already beat lots of big, horrendous challenges as a business.
Yeah.
And we've gotten to the other side and we're better for it. And so I believe the same is true anytime you're in the midst of a crisis.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's almost like building this mental model and this like mental strength to know, like, okay, we've done it before, we can do it again. So I think that's great. Okay, so now got acquired by Autodesk. What led you to venture capitalism, and was that out of nowhere? Has that always been something like, oh, I'm interested in it, or what? Yeah, what brought it up?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was not planning to join a venture capital firm. I was not planning to invest at all. I left Autodesk planning to start another company because I felt like I ran my first company for 5 years. I learned a ton, but I really didn't know what I was doing. And it was really hard. So I felt like I think I could do it better a second time, but I didn't have an idea, which I actually personally now believe that it's better to start with an idea, like a thing that's drawing you into it, than to start with the idea like, I want to start a company. Right. So thankfully I didn't start a company at that point. I went to go start playing around with ideas, and I got pinged out of the blue by Google Ventures. And the reason I was interested and took the call and ended up joining them was I felt like the last piece of the puzzle that I didn't have enough experience with and really didn't understand was venture capital. Like, I had pitched investors, I had raised money, but it felt like this black box, and I still didn't quite get it, and I didn't understand the game. And I felt like just that opportunity to sit on the other side would be extremely valuable to starting my next thing. Plus, like I said, I didn't have that idea yet. And so there was a part of me that was like, I don't know that it's the right time to start something if I don't like have an idea that's drawing me in. And thank God I followed that advice, because it is so hard to start a company. You really have to find the idea that you're extremely passionate about.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's how I ended up there. And it was a very fast decision, very fast process. And like within a couple of weeks of talking to them, I was like sitting on the other side of the table and had no idea what I was doing and had to learn that whole career path from scratch.
Wow, it's amazing. You almost viewed it as this, okay, to be a successful entrepreneur, I have a toolkit, and you were like, this is one thing that I don't have yet, and I want to add that to my toolkit. So that's kind of the mindset, and I love it. So tell me about your experience as a VC. Was it what you expected? Was there a huge learning curve? How was that experience overall?
Yeah, I think it was a lot harder than I thought.
Yeah.
I think, you often as an entrepreneur think like, all these people have all this money, like, why don't they give it to me? And then you realize when you're sitting on the other side of the table, there's like hundreds or thousands of pitches coming your way and you can't fund them all. And in fact, like the entire fund has its own business model, which is like picking the winners and returning capital. So, for me, it was a really hard adjustment to not fall in love with every company that I met, to be skeptical, not optimistic, which is not my like natural stance. I didn't love saying no all the time. Like I can definitively say this is not the career path for me. It's a really hard path because you have to be pessimistic. You have to say no all the time. You don't actually get to build the thing, which for me was like the most fun part of it, is being part of the team and building the thing. You instead are kind of like the coach, or you sit on the sidelines. So, we talked about soccer a little bit, bonded over the fact that we both played, but like, it's very different to be the coach than to be the player. And when you're watching the game and you wish you could just go in there and start like making some moves and changing the situation in the game, you don't have that option when you're an investor or a coach. So it was not easy. It was not what I expected really. But I learned a huge amount and walked away with a lot of respect for what my partners and my partners now in Modsy, my investors and venture capitalists, what are they going through? What is it like on their side of the table, and what do they need out of a partnership? Which was incredible.
Yeah, I'm sure there was such valuable insight from being on the other side of the table that you brought to Modsy. So bringing you to Modsy now, I'm really interested in just the founding story of Modsy. What inspired you to start? And did you have that idea before you left Google Ventures, or what was the timeline like?
Yeah, I did have the idea. I think it was actually an idea sort of percolating in my mind for a while. But it was really, for me, grounded when my husband and I moved into a new apartment, which happened while I was working at GV and investing. We moved into a new apartment and we just went through the process that is now today our customers' real problem. It's really hard to pick out furniture and to design a room because you are making a decision where things need to be seen in context. Products need to be seen with each other, but also in the context of your specific room, its dimensions, its colors, its style. And there were so many different pieces of that puzzle that I got stuck because I couldn't visualize. And I'm not an interior designer, so I didn't even have the basics to kind of like put together a good room. And I didn't have the language. I didn't know what style was. So before I knew it, I kind of like got obsessed with this idea that in the future, you'd be able to basically take photos of any room and then shop from what feels like a digital catalog of your room, which was an important piece of the puzzle for me. It meant like really high quality graphics. They had to be photorealistic and like catalog quality designs, not like do it myself, like cheap or like bad design, like good design, like somebody who's professional has put it together for you. And so that was like a light bulb moment for me. I started thinking about it. And within, I think it was about 3 months, I decided I am waking up every day thinking of this idea. It's time for me to go start it. And I was on my way to founding Modsy.
Yeah. So how was the process? How did it differ from your first company? And almost what lessons did you learn from your first company, from VC, that you really took to Modsy, that you saw a big difference?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is it does make a difference when you are doing it the second time around to have that life experience, to, like I was saying before, like really know internally what happens when you make a decision that was like the wrong decision. So the beginning was kind of fast and fluid. It was like I felt like I knew the rules of the game at that point, right? Like start a company, have a co-founder, build a small team, build a prototype, do a lot of user testing, validate the idea. And we just started building and it was very clear we were onto something. Like my customer pain point was a universal customer pain point. We, prototyped it. So we really understood what the customer was looking for. We knew what the full feature set would be. We started setting milestones for like launch. And I'd say everything went pretty fluid, including like we raised a seed round, we raised our Series A because I had a good network, I had good credibility.
Yeah.
And then we went to launch, and then it was like a whole new world for me. And I realized I, one, had never launched a consumer-facing product. And the fact that this product really kind of started to work with the market didn't mean it was easy. And so having that confidence we'd found product market fit, but still having the challenge of growing a new market, a new consumer category, building up a marketplace and awareness, understanding marketing, customer acquisition, and then operations, because we had like a service component to it. They were all new things for me. So I would say, about a year in, I suddenly hit like brand new territory, and the next 4 years after that has all been net new. None of it was easy to build on.
Amazing. So what are the numbers today? How many people work at Modsy today, and how many are you leading?
Yeah, so we have a little over 100 employees.
Wow.
And then we have similarly about 100 plus designers all over the country that work with us on a contract basis, because they often have their own design companies as well.
Yeah.
And then we kind of have this international network. They're not full-time employees, but we have engineering teams in a few different locations around the world. So it's kind of a web. I guess it's a little over 200 people.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. So I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about your leadership style. And I'm going to ask a specific question. So I heard a podcast, another one that you were on. And one thing you love is the idea of goal setting and vision boards. So I want you to talk a little bit more about that, because I love asking my guests these questions because they all have kind of different perspectives of goal setting. So I want to hear yours and what you do at your company with your team.
Yeah, I mean, I think in life, I just really believe it's helpful to have clarity on what you're trying to achieve. Like, again, I do it in my personal life, like writing down a handful of things that you want to come true. And I often start, at least in my personal life, and then at points at Modsy, I'll start with this, like, in a year, I want things to look like this. And it's like a visual / like storytelling exercise of like what you want that future feeling to be, the state to be. And then from that, you can start to derive like, okay, these are now the key things I need to make happen in order to achieve that vision or that dream. And so, for me, goal setting, again, like personally and at Modsy, it ends up then clarifying those couple of most important things to do. And so at the company level, we do that. At team levels, we do that. And then at individual levels, we do that. We actually have a big like master spreadsheet that the whole company uses where these things all like layer into each other. And I tell everybody that it's not an exercise that you just do to like check, got my goals done. Yeah. It should be like literally the basis of your day-to-day, hour-to-hour work. Like you should be constantly checking back or subconsciously checking back. Like, am I making progress towards that big goal that I set out for myself? And once you have it written down, it's also like always living in your subconscious, so you have a much better chance to achieve it. Definitely. So yeah, I believe in it like holistically. Every part of my being believes in the importance of that.
And so for the longer term goals, like 1 year, 5 years, is that more of a visual thing, or are these still like in words, just sentences? Like how does it look?
I like to start with the narrative part of it. Yeah. And then writing it down. To me, writing it down often entails creating a visual aspect, like describing the details, like I said, not just how things look, but also sometimes how you feel. Yeah. And so like we did this again at the company level, like what will it feel like at the beginning of 2021? Like what will our company mental state be? Yeah. Right? What will we have achieved? What will what will this aspect of the business or the, design look like, right? You can do all of these different buckets. Yeah. But I start by writing it, because if I write it down, then you can start to kind of like clarify and turn it into bullets. I find that if you go the other way, you sort of start with these like little bullets, there's a lack of clarity, right? Like there's many ways that can be interpreted.
Yeah. Yeah. Shanna, that's great. So before we get into the more fun questions, I am interested in, I know you're passionate about female leadership and females in tech and just having that confidence. So you've been a female in VC and a founder. So tell me a little bit more about your experience and what do you think needs to happen to almost keep increasing the number of females getting invested, founders, etc.
Yeah, this one's a hard one, right? Like, I think my only recommendation is that we all just stick with it and keep going, right? Like, it is a numbers game ultimately. Like, the more women that get into the pipeline, into positions of founders, into positions in venture capital firms, the more kind of we empower each other. But we are a bit stuck. Like, we have not made a huge amount of progress, specifically in terms of founding companies, having, major exits and investing in companies. It can be quite volatile when you look back over the last couple of decades. So, for me, I guess like every other major problem, like, it's about like each of us individually. We just got to like, buckle up and like say, this is going to be hard. We're in the period of change, and that period of change might be long. So we're doing our part by just staying strong and like going for it, even if the path for us is going to be like much rockier than hopefully the next few generations.
Yeah. I agree. And I think there's a lot of groups, and from my research, it seems that like that's such an important aspect of it, is just like sticking together and making sure we're behind you and all that stuff. So I think that's a big part of it. And I know you're heavily involved in that, so that's great. So, Shanna, I could honestly go on and ask you way more questions, but for the sake of time, 2 more questions. One, what is a passion or hobby that you have that's just completely unrelated to your work?
I really love running. I mean, again, it probably ties back to like athletics as a kid, but for me, running is kind of like meditation, like to start a day with like an awesome run where I can clear my mind, I can think about things, I sort of get my adrenaline pumping. Like, it's just like, it's one of my favorite things to do. And I used to do marathons. I used to be like more competitive. Now I just do it to like, just to be.
Yeah. And like, it's interesting. When I ask this question, a lot of the times the passion is almost the form of meditation. And it's like where you feel most present, which is so important, especially as a founder and someone where it often gets lonely and things like that. So I think that's definitely important. Okay, so as a final question, kind of similar, but not really, is what is a fun or weird talent that you have that no one else really knows about? So I'll go first. So mine is blueberry throwing. Okay, so I got a blueberry here. I'm going to scoot back a bit. All right, we'll see how this goes. Okay. There we go.
Wow. It's good talent.
Try. Let's go. So yeah, what would
awesome.
you say is yours?
Mine is probably like, it's a very useless talent in today's age, but it used to be like wayfinding. Like I could go into any city, like before there were mobile phones, etc. And any kind of digital map. And like, I was always the one who like immediately got the mental map of the whole place and could navigate and knew where to turn and where to go. But again, like, it's kind of useless in the age of like iPhones.
No, that's still so cool. I love that. I think that like, I don't really know how like you walk around the city and then you just know, or like, how do you know in such a new city?
Sometimes, we had this weird story when my family and I went to Venice. I studied abroad in Italy, and we went to Venice, and we'd never been there, and we were trying to get to like some restaurant on some street, and I just like felt like it should be this way. I always say that like I like should have been a bird.
Yeah.
Like, I just like had this like honing sense, like it was there, it was over there. I'd never been there. I wasn't looking at a map. I had no idea.
Oh wow, that's amazing. I love that. Nice. What's it called? Geographical intuition almost, or something.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, Shanna, thank you so much for coming on to SheLeads. I learned a lot, and I'm so excited for others just to hear your story and learn incredible lessons. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.